countries, but it will probably not reach Europe. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have.
Yeah, thank you very much for these answers. Fragen von Ihrer Seite. Darum geht es jetzt los. Bitte schön.
I heard the question several times, or the point several times, that a premium is to be paid for the Desertec project. Premium, I would say, maybe ends up in additional price, a higher price per kilowatt hour of power. So my question is, what are your assumptions? What will be the kilowatt hour when it's fed into the national grid? Will it be 20 cents, or will it be 25, or what will it be?
That's a very good question.
Is there a simple answer on that?
No, of course not. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we have much better natural resources in North Africa. It's a factor of 2, so already you can reduce your capex by half, so that's the starting point of the equation. Then you need to run the maths and say, what is the increase of my cost of capital? And by the way, it's not just the sponsors of the project, the equity investors, the debt investors are key. And debt investors are very reluctant to invest in projects with not very strong guarantees. And this is where the problem is at this moment.
Okay, thank you. There was the next question, please.
Mr. Umlauf, you said that Northern Africa could only supply a certain percentage of the overall energy being produced. Is that because already that smaller percentage of 10% is already so difficult to find enough investments for? Is that the reason, or other technological reasons? Because on long term, there will be not much more sunshine in Germany than it is now. So, and the coal will be used up eventually. Or is there another technology on the horizon, like, for example, hydrogen production in Northern Africa, so that would be competitive then, or would form part of the overall energy mix?
Thanks for that question. I would like to split the question. The 15% is an indication that came out of the ELR study in the mid-2000s. So I wouldn't take that as an exact figure. But the key message is that I, for supply security reasons, would always vote for a mix of energies in Europe. So I would just suggest that we try to put in place as much as possible, but I think it will always be a mix. That's the key message I would transfer. So but there's no technological reason. Nevertheless, you should be aware of the tremendous demand growth in North Africa over the next years. So we should not only take a European perspective, but also a Northern African perspective. And there will be a tremendous installation wave also for the domestic needs of North Africa. This is one part of the answer. The other, you talked about hydrogen. This is about the transport of energy, so to say. Hydrogen has been discussed back in the 70s and 80s a lot. There are quite some losses in producing it and transporting and changing to electricity again. So as of today, as the HVDC technology has matured to that extent, hydrogen probably is too lossy to serve as a transport medium.
Just to this point, my question is: you said you discussed that in the 70s, 80s, but hasn't there been a lot of change in the meantime? Because large car makers start to introduce hydrogen cars in the next few years, and I think it would make a lot of sense to produce hydrogen and ship it to the German and English and Dutch harbors, and you are much faster in terms of time to market the product in these markets.
it may be the case. I just mentioned there are losses to transform the energy. Hydrogen, of course, has advantages in its own in terms of mobility applications and a couple of other things. So this is not an argument against hydrogen. It's just about a comparison how to transport the energy over large distances. So there are certainly applications for hydrogen, sure.
Erwin Lauschner, Zeitmanager München. A question to Mr. Tuati. I want to add an additional political risk which can be turned into an advantage. Professor Töpfer, who is a raving fan of the Desertec initiative, is promoting and talking about this risk. That means North America has 25% or 30% of youth. They will have a major unemployment, and there will be a major pressure political-wise. We see that they all will invade Europe to get employments. And Desertec initiative could create a massive, and Dr. Rüschen mentioned it a little bit on the side part, to develop business over in North America, and electricity is a base to develop business in North America, and it is also a social support for us to save us Europeans if we promote to Desertec to make up businesses and industries over in North America to get the people there into work. And therefore this could be one of an additional advantages that you could promote in Desertec.
Actually, I went to Algeria 2 weeks ago, and in case we had forgotten about your point, it's exactly what the Ministry of Energy told us. There are two requirements. It's one, to help them export electricity to Europe, and the second is actually to train their people and provide jobs.
Okay, I mean, what people in the region say when you speak to them, they want to have a fair share of the value chain, and they want not just have foreign companies and building a plant and then exporting the energy. They want to have a production capacity as much as possible, and they want to produce components locally. And when you really scale the technology, you have enough plants being produced or being assembled there, then there is enough reason to build these production plants locally. And this will only be realized if that can be done in a win-win situation. If Europeans think they can just build plants and export energy, that's not going to work. The countries there want to have their fair benefit out of it, and what Mr. Töpfer says is that this additional social impact you will have. I think it is very important, and that's why the project probably got so much attention in the public and was emotionally so well received by all different organizations or parts across the political spectrum, and I think that should not be underestimated, particularly in the current political environment in that region.
Schön. Da oben war die nächste Frage.
Geldermann, Energieforschungszentrum Niedersachsen und Universität Göttingen. Herr Utz, Sie hatten angesprochen die Akzeptanz von Stromübertragung. Meine Frage wäre in die Richtung von einem Akzeptanzmanagement in Nordafrika. Könnte es nicht sein, dass es so ankommt, dass die besser Nordis statt die besser Westis, also von dem Norden herkommen, die Energie abgreifen und nach Europa transportieren? Gibt es dort aktive Bemühungen, um eben auch aus den Schwierigkeiten, die man in der Energieversorgung in Europa und jetzt gerade auch bezüglich Technologiefolgenabschätzung hat, um da Vorbeugung zu treffen? Es gibt auch ein bisschen kritische Stimmen, die sagen, dass der politische Umschwung in Nordafrika nicht zufällig ist, sondern Vorbeugung dafür, dass Desertec umgesetzt werden soll. Solche Stimmen gibt es. Da würde mich interessieren, was Ihre Ansicht dazu ist.
Vielen Dank. Ich glaube, das ehrt das Thema Desertec ein bisschen zu stark.
Das war auch nicht meine Idee. Ich meine, das ist was
also, Sie haben natürlich völlig recht. Die Akzeptanz in Nordafrika muss da sein. Ich würde sogar noch weitergehen. Es ist ja eine Entscheidung der nordafrikanischen Länder, was sie mit ihrer Sonne, mit ihren Investitionen, mit ihrem Land machen. Und wie Herr Tuati gerade schon gesagt hat, es muss eine Win-Win-Situation irgendwie entstehen. Und das fördert in der Regel auch die Akzeptanz für solche Dinge. Das zweite Thema ist Akzeptanz, kommt auch damit, dass natürlich erhebliche Mengen der Energie, die man dort produziert, in Nordafrika auch zur Verfügung stehen müssen. Für die Entwicklung dieser rasch wachsenden Bevölkerung, dieser sich auch stark weiterentwickelnden Bevölkerung, mit sehr viel junger Bevölkerung, mit sehr hoch gebildeter Bevölkerung in einigen Ländern, Algerien, Tunesien, denke ich, Ägypten. Also ich habe den Eindruck, die Akzeptanz war vielleicht vor einem Jahr noch nicht so ganz da, weil das Thema auch ein bisschen überhaupt kam. Aber je länger wir eigentlich in den Ländern werden, desto mehr Akzeptanz spüre ich, auch wenn ich dort in diesen Ländern reise.
Da oben hat noch eine Meldung.
Maybe you could introduce yourself as the others. Excuse me.
I'm manager of the area of fuel cell technique. Question to all three speakers. What do you think about a broader political solution? I believe we need a fair play, and one idea to create North African European economic community, to give them development. We want to have energy, but we want not only money for energy.
I think the idea of a European North African partnership, I mean, has been mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's actually a good idea. However, very complex. I mean, first you have to sort of somehow align the European countries, and then you have to align the North African countries, and then you have to align the two regions. Maybe having some bilateral agreements to start with is probably a better idea than to try to have everybody. I mean, there's, for example, the Mediterranean solar plan, which is already, it's going in the same direction as Desertec, but it's politically driven, whereas Desertec is driven by private companies. And I would say today Desertec is more advanced than the solar plan, although the solar plan has started a year earlier. And that's probably because it's relatively complex. Many countries on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea are involved. And therefore, maybe having a bilateral approach to start with and then enlarge that and include other countries could be the more convincing concept.
Also, a very short answer from my side. I think that the idea is absolutely valid to become more partners and integrate the region. My recommendation is just to make to decide: is it going more for the overall political framework first, being very unspecific in the beginning, or is it starting with concrete projects and making good examples of how cooperation can work, and typically good examples spread. So my recommendation is the second version. Do good examples.
I go back in history and you look at how the European Union started after World War II. It was between France and Germany. It was specific to steel and coal. So indeed we started small in terms of geography, small in terms of sectors, and this is how we grew. Another element of observation, more recent history, when President Obama flew to China, he came back with a check of 190 billion US dollars because he sold a large number of aircraft. Nobody complained that none of these aircraft were Airbus. So when we work with North Africa, I fully agree, we should find a way to exchange and protect Europeans' interests and say, look, it should be European technology, not Chinese technology to produce electricity here in North Africa. In exchange, of course, we create jobs, we train people. A deal of that nature, I think, makes a lot of sense, and Desertec could be a good way of achieving that.
Letzte Frage bitte. Da oben war noch. Gut, dann machen wir die beiden Fragen noch und dann müssen wir aber zum Ende.
Ich hätte eine Frage an den Herrn Lutz, glaube ich, persönlicher, weil es besser passt. Und zwar sprechen Sie immer vom Energiemix in Europa. Und ich hätte gerne eine Gegenüberstellung oder Relation der Kosten von Wind gegenüber Wasser und Solar. Und zwar, welche Potenziale Sie darin erkennen und welche tatsächlichen aktuellen Effizienzen in den verschiedenen Sparten. Und vielleicht noch eine kleine Anschneidung des Themas Gezeitenkraftwerke, ob die nicht auch eine Rolle spielen. Aber
wirkliches Angebot gilt auch nach der Session, kann ich ein paar sagen. Die Reife dieser Techniken sind einfach sehr unterschiedlich. Hydro sehr reif, Wind ziemlich reif, Solar reift noch, Gezeiten eher unreif. Ganz einfach. Und dementsprechend sind auch die Kosten entsprechend gestaffelt. Ansonsten sind die Techniken auch in ihrer Erzeugungscharakteristik unterschiedlich. Einige produzieren immer Abruf, andere produzieren dann, wenn der Strom am dringendsten gebraucht wird, nämlich an sonnigen Mittagen, das Photovoltaik. Also es ist auch sozusagen in der Erzeugungsqualität ein kleiner Unterschied zwischen diesen.
So, jetzt war hier vorne noch die Frage und dann müssen wir wirklich zum Ende kommen. Bitte.
Barbara Butter from Viber AG. It's a question to all three of you. Dr. Utz mentioned before that in Europe the power grid isn't set so far. So by investing in Desertec, all three companies, don't you do the second step before the first, if the infrastructure isn't set?
I spoke 18 months ago at a conference where we were criticized for investing so little money at this point of time into the project. Somebody said this is only marketing budget. Because effectively, every company is at the moment investing only a limited amount of money to prepare Desertec. We have not invested big amounts, and nobody would do that from an economic point of view before you have not resolved the question, where does the energy go to? And therefore things have to develop in parallel. And I mean, if we talk about the first reference project in Morocco, that can be built without having an upgraded transmission infrastructure in Europe. But once you want to get to the closer to the 10 or 15%, then you have to do it. And nobody will invest into power plants, which at the end of the day will probably be there and not be able to produce energy because it cannot be transported. So that will clearly be answered. The second question will be answered before we invest big amounts of money into the first aspect, first part.
Absolutely correct, and especially in grid extension, I typically observe that it goes hand in hand with generation capacity. There's a tendency to lag behind generation capacity. So it seems that grid extension is something you do if there is no other choice, kind of. So it would probably be very difficult to come up with a proposal to expand the grids first.
If you look at sorry to go back to history again, the grid in Europe were mostly built to connect large population areas with the mountains, because the mountains we had the hydroelectricity. That's what happened in Germany, in France, in Norway, of course, and many parts of Europe, Italy and Spain. So it was actually driven by renewable energy, because renewable energy tends to be produced in areas where people don't live. They don't live with a huge amount of sun, a huge amount of water and high mountains. You live in more peaceful environments typically. So the issue we are facing now is that we move from a state level optimization to a European level optimization. And nobody is in charge. Today, nobody is in charge. Large utilities like E.ON were forced to sell their grids by the European Commission. The laws are towards independence of the grids from the generation because of competitive issues. That's fine, we understand why, but the problem is that there is no grid operator at the European level. So who is going to drive that? So we have a policy issue.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the tasks of the moderator is to have an eye on the schedule, and that's a problem. We have to interrupt this very interesting discussion now. And let me say, even if there have been many very interesting presentations in other meetings of this Munich Management Kolloquium, this has been one of the most fascinating sessions in this colloquium, and so I want to say thank you very, very much to our three excellent speakers to share your visions and impressions, ideas with all of us. And I can say somehow Desertec seems to be the goal of the future, and our task altogether now might be, because you said one of the risks is not to have enough political support, that we say we as customers want energy from sources like this. This is our task altogether that you can take home after this colloquium. Thank you very much.